Right. So we're going to look at keyboard interaction. So a lot of this is going to feel very familiar because we've already looked at mouse interaction. A few weeks ago, earlier in the semester, we looked at mouse events like mouse X and mouse Y, mouse pressed and mouse is pressed to interact with our program or our sketch. And the keyboard pretty much works the same way, but of course there are multiple keys. So part of the process is looking at what key is being pressed. So we're going to be kind of reviewing our environment variables, events, and Boolean logic as well. So we'll start out with just key is pressed. And this is a Boolean system variable that's just going to be true or false. We can see these if we go to the P5 reference and go to events. You'll see all the events related to the keyboard. And the ones that do not have parentheses, these are just properties or data. So key is pressed just tells us if a key is pressed, any key. Key is going to give us the actual key that's being pressed. Key code is going to give us the number value for the key that's being pressed. And then these functions are kind of like mouse pressed or mouse release. We have key pressed. When the key is pressed, that function gets called. Same thing with released. Key typed and key is down are a little bit different. Key typed is when you press and release. Key is down is just when the key is down.
So key code, key and key is pressed go together.
Well, they're similar in the sense that they're just variables. They're not functions.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's if we look up our JavaScript script key codes, there's a website that will just tell you which code is for which key. So if I go to this website and I hit A, it's going to show me all of the information related to A. So the key code for A is 65. This is the ASCII key code. This comes from the ASCII standard. So if you look up an ASCII chart, it's going to look like something like this. And if you look in here, you're going to see there's A, and the row is 6, and this doesn't actually line up. That's kind of interesting. Maybe this is an old ASCII standard. Let's see if we can find the right. Okay, here we go. So here's A. Oh, this is the same thing. 6, A, B, C, D. Let's see if we can find one where they're all written out. Here we go. Okay. So this is probably easier to read. Okay, so we have our key code and then the hex value and then the character. So we can see here's A, and it has, so this has, let's see, where's 65? Here we go. 65 is A. Okay, so I was looking at the wrong thing because I was looking at lowercase a, but this is actually for capital A, which is 65 is capital A. So lowercase a is 97, but for some reason this shows 65 regardless of what I hit. There's also this event.code, which is key A. This is kind of a newer standard. But usually the key code, this 65, is more reliable than the other values because it's consistent across different platforms and languages. So like the enter key is 13, the space bar is 32, 1 is 49, and then it goes up from there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is just what the computer kind of encodes these different keys as. So there's a couple different ways to figure out what key is being pressed, but the key code is kind of the most reliable way. It is interesting that it's not lining up exactly with our expectations. So 65 is the decimal, character is A, and then we have 97, the character is lowercase a. Anyway, we can test it out in P5 and make sure that it works correctly. But before we get to our key codes, we are going to look at key is pressed. So basically, key is pressed just tells us if any key is pressed. So I'm just going to set up this example real quick. So I have the gray background, and so I'm just going to ask if key is pressed, then I'm going to change the background color. So I'll say background is purple. Okay, so when I'm testing something using the keyboard, I have to click on the canvas so that the browser knows that I'm, interacting with the canvas. If I hit keys over here, I'm still just going to be typing inside of the editor. So when I use one of these examples, I do have to go over and click on the canvas, but then you can see that it's registering that interaction.
What key are you pressing?
I'm pressing just random keys. So key is pressed is not a specific key. It's just if any key is pressed, then it will be true. Okay, so this is the same thing as saying key is pressed equals true. But it's any key. It's not a specific key. So if I hit spacebar, if I hit enter, if I hit escape, if I hit tab, any key that I hit, as long as I don't do something else in the browser, I'm going to get this purple background. So then we have to add to this in order to make sure that we're pressing the right key. So that's where it gets a little bit more complicated than our mouse. So the key value, as we mentioned, gives us the key that's being pressed. And so we can use this and we can check if the key has a certain value. And then we can do different things based on that value. So in this case, there's different ways to set this up. So I'm going to put a new if statement inside of my previous if statement, but I could also use a compound if statement. There's different ways that I could set up the logic. But let's take out the purple for a second. Or actually, I can leave that there. And after that, I'll just add another condition. So I'll say if key, and so key is another default P5 value, so we can't have our own key variable. This is just going to be whatever key is currently pressed. This one is a little tricky to use, though, because the key may be A or it may be capital A. It may be G or it may be capital G. So you have to be a little bit careful. So if we check if the key is G, put a little space there, which is not necessary. We can do a background that's green. So now if I hit the A key, I still have my purple background. But if I hit the G key, I get a green background. If I hit Shift G, I don't get a green background because I'm looking for lowercase g. Or if I hit caps lock and then I hit G, oh, actually I have my caps lock disabled, so that won't work. But if I hit Shift and then G, I don't get that green background. So we can check if a key is pressed and then also check what key we're pressing. So if I want to check for other keys, I can say if key equals B, then I can say the background is blue. And I'm just matching the letter to the background, but that's just for the example. It doesn't have to be that way. I could set B to orange if I wanted to. Okay, so now if I hit space, we still get purple. If I hit A, still get purple. If I hit G, we get green. If I hit B, now we get orange. So we're checking to see if a key is pressed, and then we're checking to see which key is being pressed. We're using the key value, which is just going to be, based on whatever the key is. So for another example, if I say key equals enter, and I think enter is capitalized, we'll see if this works. I could have another separate background. Let's do blue for this one. Okay, so now you have enter, space, and you can look up all these different values, either using this JavaScript key codes thing, or they're also in the reference somewhere. If we go to key code, oh, they actually just have a link to this website, which is where we already were. Okay, so I guess they don't have it written down anywhere, but they just use the defaults, so that's fine. And then they have encoded a few specific ones, like backspace, delete, enter. You can use these variables as well. All right, so that's pretty straightforward. So we can also use the key code. As I mentioned, this is a little bit more stable because it's accepted by all the different browsers. It's accepted by all the different platforms. So we can change these values to key codes if we want. Let's save this and I'll duplicate and I'll just rewrite it with key codes. So I'll add this to our class collection. Okay, so now instead of saying if key is G, I'll say if key code, and then the code for G, we can look that up if I go over here and I hit G on the keyboard. The code for G is 71. So I'll just type in 71, and then usually if you do this, you might want to include a comment saying what that key code is, because most people don't have the keyboard memorized. So I'll just put a little comment over here that says G. So now if I hit G, that still works, and if I hit Shift G, now it also works. So the key code works for either the lowercase or the uppercase in this case. I'm not really sure why that is, but that's what happens. Okay. So then let's code up B. So we can look up B is just 66. So put 66 here and then say that's B. Oh, I forgot to change this to key code. Okay, so now that should work. Now we get orange. And then enter, I think is 13. Yeah. So then we just change this to key code double equals 13. And so either one of these is fine. As long as your code works, it doesn't really matter. But there's a couple different ways to do it, and those are the different ways. Okay. So let's continue. So we also have the key pressed function. And so this is more like the mouse press function. It's not a value, it's a function that reacts to an event. I'm using sound in this example, but we can just use something else. So here you can see key pressed, and then we're checking the key code, and then we're playing this sound. So we're gonna look at how to play sounds in the second part of class, but for now, let's just put some drawing stuff in there. So I'll make a new example actually just to make this easier. So I'll save this and I'll duplicate and I'll just call this key pressed. Okay, so this time, actually let's just get rid of our draw function. So I'll just make a background like normal. And then I'll put a separate function called key pressed. And in here, I'll basically just do the same thing. I'll check which key is pressed, and then I can do different things based on that key pressed. So I'll say if key code is 13, then let's draw a pink background. Okay, so now I have to click on the canvas still, but if I hit enter, now we get a pink background. So key pressed is just going to get called whenever I press a key. Again, it doesn't matter which key is pressed. Whatever I have written in this function will go when I press a key, but I have to check which key it is. So if I run this again and I hit the A key, nothing happens because it's not key code 13, and so there's no other code to react to the A key. So we still have to use the logic within the key pressed if we want to use a specific key. If you just want whatever key to work, then you can ignore that part. But normally, when we're working with keyboard, of course, we want to know which key is being pressed to change the different outcomes. I think that's it for this part. There's also a key released. So maybe we want to set our background back to gray after the key is released. So we can do the same thing, and I can still check the key code, and then let's draw our background back to 220. So now if I press the enter key, it'll be pink, but as soon as I release the enter key, it goes back to gray because I'm drawing another gray background here. So that way we can react to both the beginning of the key press and when the key is released. So the keyboard event is really two events. It's when the key is pressed down and when the keyboard is released back up. Okay, so in the second part of class, we'll look at adding sounds to this. So when you press a key, we'll trigger a sound. Again, the keyboard and the sound don't have to go together. You can trigger a sound with a mouse. You can play a sound just based on other things that are happening in your sketch. But we're just pairing them together as a way to learn both of them in one project. So I'll let you guys play around with the key pressed for a while. We are going to work on doing some visualizations with the sound. So you might want to think about what visuals might go with what sounds you might want to use. And so we'll look at putting the sounds into P5 and then triggering the sounds with the different key presses together in the second part of class. Okay, any questions or anything you guys want to review with our keyboard?
I just have one question. You said there's two actions we're accounting for. The key is pressed and it's not pressed.
Yeah.
Function before. Key is pressed, that's understood. And then once the key is not being pressed, then it goes back to its original state.
Yeah.
For instance, for this one, you had to put that in. But for key is pressed, you don't have to add it with this. That's right.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point. So the difference is, basically, key is pressed is always either false or true, and it's getting updated by P5 constantly. So every time, our browser, when P5 is running, it's running like 60 frames per second, and it's constantly checking to see if we're pressing a key or a mouse or whatever. That's how it knows when it happens, because it's constantly checking. It's going over and over again, checking to see, are we pressing the keyboard? And so key is pressed is always either false or true. But in the draw function is also going all the time. So that's why if we say if key is pressed, it's always going to be updating, versus with key pressed, it only updates when we press the key. Yeah. So yeah, it kind of does the same thing, but there's two different ways to deal with it. Okay.